Hi, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Apologies for the delay. All right, let's talk about EB-1A final merits. So, chose this topic in particular because I've been coming across a lot of people who have gotten 4 or 5 criteria approved, but have still been getting denied on final merits. So I thought I would talk about this in particular. So let's first look at what it means to get denied on final merits. So when you get denied on final merits, what the officer is really saying, and that at least based on what I've been hearing from immigration lawyers, is they're saying that you presented all this evidence, but that you haven't really shown that you've risen to the top of your field. As in, you've done activities, you met the criteria on a plain language level, probably, but that everything in totality doesn't really show that you've risen to the top of your field. And that could be because you didn't define your field properly. Perhaps that could have been because your evidence just wasn't relevant enough, didn't make sense. So if you're in that situation, what should you do to strengthen your final merits to potentially prevent another denial? There is generally no universal thing you could be doing, but there are a couple of ways to potentially strengthen the final merits of your profile based on conversations with immigration lawyers. One is independent references. So getting other top industry experts, the top industry experts outside of your field to independently verify that what you have said about your expertise or claim your impact on your field, that what you have said is what you have said. And to have them also talk about how they think you've risen to the top of your field, if that is really what they can say. Getting those kinds of references, especially from some very established experts, can help with final merits because that would that's essentially directly strengthening your argument for how you risen to the top of your field. They can also look at the evidence that you presented and provide further explanatory context. They can look at the evidence that you have presented, these experts, that is, and say, this is how this piece of evidence helps with maybe this other piece of evidence that in totality shows that you have risen to the top of your field. Now, that's something that you can get simply by, well, a couple of ways. You can talk to people who know the people you already know. You can get involved in more prestigious opportunities within your field, and that's how you can meet some of these top experts. It's not as simple as you're just going to get independent references from top experts simply by reaching out to them. It's going to take a lot more. It's going to mean showing up in the right places, going to the right kinds of events, and then probably just asking them if they can help support your application. I mean, there's really no way around. I mean, like, there's really no other way around collecting these kinds of references except for instead of just emailing these people, showing up to places where they usually hang out and then just asking them up front. After, of course, having a conversation with them or maybe helping them with something that they need help with. Maybe it's some sort of research they need help with or some project they're doing, or you just happen to meet these people because you're involved in a particular advisory board. There are a lot of ways to meet these kinds of industry experts who can help testify on your behalf, affirm your claims. Because remember, when you get denied on final merits, what's really happening is you're being told your evidence as a whole does not show that you've risen to the top of your field. Now, how do you plug that hole? You go and find more evidence that helps make the argument for how you've risen to the top of your field. And yeah, one way is to get independent references from top industry experts. You can also target prestigious opportunities in your field. You can go speak at top conferences. You can get covered by some of the top publications in your field. That's directly helping with final merits because you are adding to your bank of evidence that shows that you've risen to the top of your field. With this approach, and I'm not saying you should do independent references or target prestigious opportunities, do both, and they're usually related, because if you target prestigious opportunities, you'll come across industry experts who may be very open to commenting on your work and providing that support for your application. But prestigious opportunities, you would still also have to explain the prestige behind these opportunities. You would have to explain how someone who's never worked in your field would be able to understand the opportunities that you are targeting to be prestigious. Definitely something you will want to explain as well. Having more relevant evidence is also something that you will want to think about if you want to improve the final merits of your profile. A lot of profiles I've seen that seem to have this issue, they tend to take a very certain form, a very specific form. So for the industry professional, it's usually they have a really strong leader and critical role, but then all their other evidence is very disjointed, fragmented, not really related to their leading a critical role. Maybe they've spoken at quite a few academic conferences. Maybe they've reviewed quite a few academic papers, but ask them about industry recognition within their field, and there's no evidence for that at all. They haven't spoken at a single conference in their field. They haven't judged a single industry-related opportunity. So the argument you're putting forth with that kind of profile is, I'm a top industry expert with no external recognition for my industry expertise, only academic recognition, which is just a very odd argument to present if you want to show that you've risen to the top of your field as an industry professional. So in that case, you would include more relevant evidence that showcases your industry expertise, judging particular industry events that are related to your field of expertise. Or it could be publishing in the right industry publications to show that you are a recognized thought leader in your space. Something else to consider. So sometimes it just takes a bit of thought around your case narrative. As in, like, what are you really trying to say with your evidence? A lot of you don't really have that in mind when it comes to profile building. And it's fine to start doing activities to try to check off the criteria, but at some point you're going to have to deal with the absence of strong final merits, because you'll have a profile that has a bunch of activities, but you just won't really have a profile that says anything about how you've risen to the top of your field. So really keep that in mind as well. What are you trying to say about how you've risen to the top of your field? How are you saying it? Are you showing enough acclaim? Are you showing enough expertise? Are you showing enough impact on your field if that's something that you want to rely on to show that you've risen to the top of your field? All of these components have to work together for your final merits to make sense, to be strong. And if these components seem disjointed, or they don't really seem to show how you've risen to the top of your field, as based on the example I just described, for example, you could claim that that person with the industry expertise, but just academic evidence, they don't have the external recognition that most industry experts in their field would have, and that's why they haven't really shown that they've risen to the top of their field. That's a valid counter argument. So you really have to think about what gaps are currently in your profile that are stopping you from showing that you are at the top of your field. And something else that you could potentially look into is what other top experts in your field, what they look like. What conferences are they involved with? Who says they're a top expert? Are other top experts in your field saying that this person is a top expert? Because if so, then that is strong evidence. Maybe you are of the same caliber. Then try to mirror that. Try to get other top experts to say you are a top expert. And if you can't, are you really a top expert? Is how the argument would go. So you can also look to see what other top experts are doing, what they look like in your field, and then see what characteristics you can draw from them and then implement into your own profile. That is another way to approach final merits. You can also, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for industry professionals, but if you worked on something high profile, media coverage could be something to target, because showing that you are recognized in mainstream media or trade specific media, you're showing up in the publications that get read by all the top professionals in your field, or by in the media outlets and publications that everyone knows about. That's widespread acclaim. That can be beneficial for your final merits. So it's really thinking about what is currently missing in your profile that's stopping someone who has never worked in your field, the officer, from concluding that you have risen to the top of your field. That is what you want to be thinking about when it comes to final merits. And if you're in a situation where you have 4 or 5 strong criteria, getting approved for those, but then getting denied on final merits, perhaps it's because there are these gaps in your profile that stop you from showing how you've risen to the top of your field, that stop you from communicating your understanding of how you've risen to the top of your field. Because it's not really about what you say, it's not really about what you claim, it's about whether you can prove what you say, whether you can prove what you claim. So yeah, that's just a bit about final merits. Anyone have questions? Feel free to start asking questions in the chat. Anyone have final merit? Questions about final merits? Or just questions about EB-1A profile building? I can also talk a bit about some of the strongest profiles that I've seen with EB-1A. I mean, with current RFEs and Noids, just because you have a strong profile doesn't mean you're definitely going to get approved, but I have seen quite a few strong profiles, and their evidence tends to just tie together. It's that totality element. You need everything to make sense as a whole. And that usually seems to start with a well-defined field of expertise. These people are able to say that this is my field of expertise. It could be this is the problem I help solve within my field. I solve it better than 99% of other people in my field. And you can see this through the outcomes I've created through my work. You can see this through the references that say that I solve this problem really well. You can see this through the activities externally that I've done, for which I've gotten recognition for my expertise, where I've applied my expertise in solving these problems. You can see this through some of the publications that they have contributed to, where they have talked about their expertise in solving these problems that make them a top expert in their field. So you'll see in this thread that everything just seems to make sense. everything ties together. There's no like disjointed, fragmented activities. Just there's no. It's not like things are just like fragmented, disjointed. There's nothing sticking out. It's not like they have like some random journal article that has nothing to do with their field of expertise, just like lying around in their authorship, or they have like they say they're an expert in this field, but then they have no external recognition for that expertise. Everything's just what their company says, which is still that's still possible for strong final merits in that it's not like you need external acclaim, but it could help. Ren asks, what are the common reasons for RFE, even though you have enough evidence pointing to final merits or sustained acclaim? If you speak to lawyers, they will say they don't know themselves, but they're based on some conversations I've had with them. Because like it's not like RFEs are always reasonable. If you talk to lawyers, they'll tell you that some RFEs are quite arbitrary. But then there are some RFEs that just come from things not really making sense. So like you have evidence. It's like going back to the example I was talking about. Because final merits is not a defined standard nor sustained claim. When you have profiles that may not correspond to an officer's understanding of what a certain profile should look like, that's when you get an RFE. So if, for example, an officer thinks that all industry professionals should have significant external acclaim from industry, not just academia, if you present a profile with just a bunch of journal articles, but then you're like some sort of engineering manager, that wouldn't really make sense in showing how you've risen to the top of your field, because the pushback could be, if you're such a top engineering manager, why are you not published in the top engineering manager publications? Why are you not covered in these conferences? Why are you not doing these kinds of judging activities? So when there's that disconnect, that could potentially lead to an RFE. But then because there's no established standard for what final merits actually means, like it means have you shown you've risen to the top of your field? But even that is subjective. That's when you, because it's so subjective, it's really when there's like a disconnect between the officer's understanding of final merits for a particular profile and what you've actually presented. And sometimes that disconnect is quite repairable in that if it's like going back to the example, you're an industry professional, but you just have academic recognition, then get more industry recognition, get more external acclaim. If you're such a top industry expert, why has no one in your industry invited you to the top opportunities? That you're claiming that you're at the top, so why is no one inviting you? So that's valid pushback. Anyone else have questions? I can also talk a bit about a claim. So a claim matters because if you are a top expert in your field, as you claim you are, getting recognized for your expertise should be a part of your argument. Because how else would you expand on that argument? Like if your work is so noteworthy, if it's so impressive, if it's so excellent, then shouldn't other top industry experts say that it's excellent, say that it's impressive, say how they've used your work? And that's something that a lot of people don't really think about because they only think about expertise when it comes to EB-1A. They think I need to show I have a really high level of expertise, get a bunch of people at my company to say that I have a very high level of expertise, and then that's that. That's all. Well, not really. Because if you look at top experts in most fields, they will probably have external recognition as well. It's not just their company saying they're a top expert, it's the field as a whole. There are all these experts constantly providing testimonials as to how this person's work has is of such a high standard that they therefore see this person as at the top of their field. If you can't get those testimonials, then I would say that's a missed opportunity. Not necessary, but it's something to really think about. And that's probably why original contributions, if you can claim it well, tends to help a lot with your profile, helps really strengthen profiles in general if you can claim the criterion. Because if you can show significant impact in your field through the outcomes of people who have used your work, for example, top companies in your field using your work to produce significant commercial outcomes, that's far more than just expertise. It's showing significant influence in your field. And that is another component of showing that you're a top expert. You have influenced your field. You have reshaped your field in some way. When you think about experts in general, it's not just that they have a high level of knowledge in their field. That knowledge is novel, it's innovative, it's new, and it's being used, it's being applied. Think about some of the top people in tech, for example, the top experts. They're usually the people who have advanced the field in some way. And then they get recognized for advancing the field. So yeah, that's probably why original contributions, if you can claim it, can be such a strong criterion for final merits. Because meeting that threshold just helps a lot with showing that you've risen to the top of your field, because it's just what experts do mostly when it comes to most fields. They're able to present a level of expertise that then helps reshape the field. Anyone else have questions? Anyone have questions? Is it okay if only two organizations using your contribution to claim the OC criterion? Possibly, if they're two of the biggest companies in your space. Yeah, but it depends on also the magnitude of your contributions. Have you been able to contribute in a way that indicates that these companies have been able to produce significant outcomes. Something to keep in mind. What is your recommended structure for a founder's application? It's a very broad question, but generally, your leading or critical role is going to be what you do as a founder of your company. But if you're the founder, then it's probably not going to be an issue to prove leading or critical role. You will, depending on the stage of your company, you will probably want to. Depends on the stage of your company, but generally, it's leading a critical role. Judging and authorship, or judging authorship membership. These are some of the criteria that I've seen founders target. Membership tends to be possibly mentoring at top incubators, or mentoring or advising VCs. For authorship, now this is a tech founder context. Judging and authorship tend to be focused on judging hackathons, demo days, sometimes reviewing conference submissions. Authorship tends to be publishing in founder-focused publications, sometimes founder-focused media. Yeah, those are this is for a tech founder, but those are some of the criteria that I've seen targeted. Sometimes original contributions, but much harder depending on the stage of your application. Stage of your company. Anyone else have questions? Anyone else have questions? Do I help people with jobs? No, I don't. I don't know what that means. Mentoring in your field at reputed ed tech platforms, which criterion can be claimed as an industry professional? Mentoring could be judging if you're reviewing the work of others. It really depends on what kind of mentoring. But if you're looking more at judging, I would say mentoring hackathons or demo days. That's more the kind of activity that would count towards judging. If you're just mentoring people individually, that's probably not going to help that much. But it really depends. If you're mentoring people individually as part of an incubator, that could be judging because you're reviewing their work and they are your counterparts. But it really depends on a case-by-case basis. When assessing original contributions of major significance for EB-1A, do you generally prioritize open source or public contributions, or can impactful internal company work also be positioned effectively? Possibly impactful company work, but it would have to be company work that's that's been adopted in your field in some way by other top companies, and then you can directly tie your work to what's been created out of that adoption. Open source or public contributions, I have seen that. Like some people have like these GitHub repos that are used, these like open source libraries that have 10,000 plus stars on GitHub. That could be an argument for original contributions. You would have to prove the significance of the usage of your work, though. Significant and impact. What kind of impact have you had on the people who have used your work? And can those outcomes be considered significant outcomes? That's something you're going to have to prove as well. You're going to have to look into. What are the ways you could gather evidence on the original contribution when you don't have company-wide email or spot awards, even though the project itself is critical for the company? Well, critical for the company is not original contributions. Original contributions is something you've done within your field that has impacted your field that other companies have used to produce their own significant outcomes. That has nothing to do with something you've done internally. It rarely has to do with what you've done internally within your company, unless you can show that that company work has somehow been adopted by other companies in your field. I mean, if that's the case, then you would have references to start. Maybe some sort of mention of how these companies have used your work, but I don't really see that often. I mean, there could be exceptions, of course. Most of the editorial boards do not have sufficient documentation that show extraordinary abilities and expertise are required. How do we use this for the membership? Depends on what kinds of editorial boards. If you're talking about some of the top industry publications in your field, they will definitely be able to provide some sort of letter that talks about how you were selected, why you were selected, who tends to get selected. They don't have to use the term extraordinary ability, nor do these kinds of letters tend to include this kind of language, because it would be quite odd to do so. And yeah, that's how you would make an argument for membership, because how you were selected, why you were selected, how people are generally selected, that tends to be able to help with outstanding achievements. But of course, with anything related to membership, definitely not something that is, yeah, definitely something that is not. Yeah, you can't just really, you're going to have to make an argument for what outstanding achievements actually means. Because a requirement for membership is outstanding achievements. That is going to be the evidentiary standard for membership. Anyone else have questions? For infrastructure DevOps or platform engineers, where contributions are often indirect or enable others' work, how can those enabled effects be framed as original contributions of major significance? Yeah, so there are a couple of ways. For tech in general, one form of original contributions is you created some sort of open source library and now that's being used by everyone in your field because it's such a good open source library, and then it's produced significant outcomes for a bunch of companies that have adopted it. That's original contribution, one example. But it's not really about like the other form of original contributions that a lawyer told me about is if something that you've done has inspired the work of other top companies, and then they provide references saying that they were directly inspired by your work and then used your ideas. So you could make the argument that something that you did within DevOps, for instance, maybe some sort of standard you created, maybe some project you created that gained a lot of popularity in the field of DevOps, and then other companies started using the standard you created or started using your project as some sort of archetype to follow. And then that led to major advancements and significant outcomes for the companies that used your ideas. That could be original contributions. But you have to be able to thread. Yeah, you'll have to create some sort of thread in that you will have to tie the contributions you have made to maybe some project or some sort of standard, something you did, something that represents your ideas, implemented ideas. Thread that to something that other top companies started to do, and then thread that to the impact of what they did using your ideas. And that can be possible not just through company work. It could be maybe you pioneered some sort of standard within some sort of professional organization, and then that led to other companies using that standard. That's also possible. Anyone else have questions? Anyone have questions? All right, if no one else has questions, thanks everyone for joining today's live stream.